Let's take stock of the shooting guard market as it pertains to the Indiana Pacers. Do they need someone at this spot? If they do, who are the best guys available? What could this all look like? What are the resources this position could require for the Pacers? We're getting to it all today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Thursday, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today, diving back into free agency previews by position. We've talked point guards this week. We've talked Pascal Siakam this week. We looked at extensions. Now we pivot to shooting guards. Then I promise we'll ease up a bit on the free agency talk. We'll do player season recap starting tomorrow. Caitlin Cooper and I are back teaming up to do those again. Looking forward to doing that tomorrow. You'll hear about some small forwards. Next week, we'll do some draft stuff, some non-free agency stuff. There will be some free agency stuff in there. There's a shorter offseason this year because the Pacers had a good season and plenty more. And then it's draft week, like 2 weeks from now, which is insane. We're flying, or 3 weeks from now, excuse me. It's insane. We're flying through the offseason. And we're going to dive into the shooting guard market for the Pacers. I'm going to do the boring positions. And by boring, I mean less likely for the Pacers to use significant resources by myself. When we get to small forwards and power forwards, there will be a guest starting next week. We're doing shooting guards today, which is an interesting position in the NBA. There's kind of a lot required of shooting guards. I don't mean that to say that it's a demanding position that has the most important roles ever. I mean, there's a lot required in that. The versatility of the two guard spot is becoming, to me, more and more important. Like, look at the teams in the finals, what their two guards or whatever you want to call them are doing. Look at Andrew Nembhard. He's a 2 sometimes and a 3 sometimes, not very often, and a 1 sometimes. And Ben Mathurin is all 3 of those positions sometimes. And Ben Shepherd's a 2 or a 3 sometimes. And Buddy Hield was a 2 or 3 sometimes and was like a 1 sometimes. And Bruce Brown played lots of positions. Versatility is the name of the game at this spot because there's nothing specific to me in the modern NBA of versatility, right? You think of point guards, who are your table setters. You think of wings. You think of bigs, right? There's nothing generic about specifically shooting guards that makes it the most specific position ever. What makes guys great at that spot is their ability to slide to other spots, or they do something so spectacular in that position. But the current starting 2s in the finals are guys that you could classify as not 2s, as wings or as big wings or as point guards. So it's an interesting position between the versatility and the specialists. And I think the Pacers already have a good mixture of those on their team, which is what makes this kind of interesting to dive into, right? Already on the roster for next season, no free agency required. Bennedict Mathurin, certainly you'd call a shooting guard with air quotes because positions are whatever. Andrew Nembhard started at the 2 for much of the Pacers season. Ben Shepherd was their backup 2 for much of the Pacers season, but Mathurin played some 1 sometimes and started at the 3 to start the season next to Bruce Brown, unless you want to call Bruce Brown the 3. And Nembhard started the 2, but was the backup point guard for a lot of the season. And Ben Shepherd was the 2, but also played the 3 and guarded 3s sometimes. So, like, what position are these guys? Who knows? The key thing to take from this is if shooting guards either need to be ball handling guards or wings, right? It's very hard to be neither of those things and be good at this position unless you're like a lockdown defender or shooter. And we'll talk about some of those guys. So it's a very interesting position now in the NBA. What does that mean for the Pacers and how they would approach it? Well, to me, if you're versatile and you can play 1, 2, or 3, you can kind of fit anywhere, right? That was kind of my approach to the point guard position free agency too, is like, if the Pacers were going to sign a 1, it would be a 1 who can play not just 1, because they don't need that, but you can always use guys who can play 2 or 3 or have something at this position that no one else has, whether that's a skill, whether that's a size, whether that's athleticism. So that is one way to approach it, is looking at that versatility. The other thing that every team could in theory need, although these guys are less effective in postseason settings most of the time, is specialists, lockdown defenders, or great shooters. If they're both of those things, Pacers can't afford them. But one or the other, you can make the case that the Pacers could specifically look for value there. And so when you look through the shooting guard market, like this is a funny name to say first, but he's the first like potentially affordable guy. Buddy Hield, you'd call a specialist shooter. I'm not advocating for the Pacers to do that. It's just something. Gary Trent Jr., same kind of deal, specialist shooter type. Malik Beasley. There's a lot of these, actually, now that I'm really diving into the top of this list. A lot of them are specialty shooters. There are some that you'd consider defenders. Isaac Okoro, Wes Matthews can kind of shoot, but I think of him more as a defensive guy. I'm sure there's more if I keep going. So that's kind of what, if you're the Pacers, if you're actually looking at this position, right? And with this team they have right now, right? Largely, I suppose. But with the team they have right now, with the resources they have right now, and granted, they didn't know Ben Shepherd was going to be good or valuable when they did this, but like they signed Bruce Brown last year, right? You can laugh at this idea of a shooting guard being brought in, but they signed one last summer. Now that Ben Shepherd descended, and I'm sure they think of it differently with how they think of Nembhard and Mathurin and everything, but that is a thing that happened like 12 months ago. So I would not write this off right away. Reason two, to at least just think about the shooting guard market is if the Pacers are going to make a significant trade, right? Third star player to add to their team with Haliburton, with Siakam, it is very likely to me that at least one and likely two of the guys that I mentioned in the two guard position, Andrew Nembhard, Ben Mathurin, Ben Shepherd, would be in that trade, right? Like they gave up 3 firsts for Siakam and they've already paid out 2 of those. So they really only have 1 outbound first in the future. But if you think about what the Pacers' next big trade is going to be, because clearly they're a team headed down a path to contend and will have to make trades in the future given their financial situation, the young guys that teams would want: Aaron Nesmith, kind of a 2, but mostly a 3. Ben Mathurin, Jarris Walker, not a 2 at all. Ben Shepherd, Andrew Nembhard, and there's, Obi, depending on how his growth goes, if they keep him, right? There's other guys in the mix, but like that would theoretically be in a way the Pacers could get into these debates without having a surplus of first, like some other teams is, offering good young players that have a lot of upside, right? That's how the Knicks got OG Anunoby this season. And so if you're the Pacers and you're thinking about 2 guard, is there a way that they squint and say, man, if we have a good hunch that we're going to trade one of Nembhard, Mathurin, Shepherd, or 2 of them for a good player within the next 12 months, do we want to get a guy now just in case, so we have something that helps us this season? The problem is, excuse me, approaching a player with that kind of thing. Hey, you might play if we do this. That doesn't really work, right? And so it'd have to be somebody who's already on the fringe of a rotation anyway. But it's not insane to me that is an outcome that could happen and lands you like a Justin Holiday level player, for example. I mean, he's not specifically a 2. I just am thinking of him, to be like a half vet, half playing kind of guy, right? Guys know about the situations of teams when they join them. Jeremy Lamb knew he'd be starting in Victor Oladipo's spot in the injury season, for example, right? Is there someone out there who would take that kind of role on the Pacers? That would be like, as of right now, without knowing what else they're going to do, the most logical sort of thing that's kind of out there on the market. But there's not a lot of like vet types who would be cheap and interesting anymore. It's a weird position, and we'll get into some of them. Like, does Garrett Temple count as a 2? He would kind of fit all of those categories to me. But other than that, it's a thinner group. So the reasons to pursue a shooting guard, it looks very likely that between Shepherd, Mathurin, Nembhard, Haliburton, McConnell, and even whatever you want to think about Nesmith shifting down at times next year or whatever, Pacers are going to have plenty of guard depth on their team next year. So they don't need to rush in to get somebody. But if there's someone out there who can play 3, can play up even higher in positions, can handle the ball sometimes, or they're a great shooter that lets you fit in any lineup, they're a good defender like Bruce Brown that let him play the 3 at times, that is where they could find value. Or if they anticipate that in the very near future they're going to have to make a move at this position, those would be the reasons they would look at this market and say, let's nab a player at this position. So who's out there? I use Spotrac for my position listing. So if you think someone's a 2 guard, but they don't get said today, there's a chance they're in the 1s or the 3s, or maybe I just don't think they're that good. But Spotrac's list of shooting guards. Who are the best guys on the market? Can the Pacers actually get any of them, should they want to? And then who are realistic targets? That's what we will get to as we continue today's podcast. Before we get to any of that, though, Let's talk about Gametime, which makes getting tickets to NBA games, including the finals, even faster and easier. Prices in the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and the lowest price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. You can use Gametime to do so many things that I personally like. I've used it before to get tickets to games, and it's gone well every time. The views from your seat feature I love. The all-in price I love. There's no hidden fees that pop up at the end. The event cancellation protection makes me feel good. The Gametime guarantee makes me feel good. They'll credit you 110% of the cost difference if you find tickets in the same section in a row for less. Everything is how ticket buying should be. There's no surprises in the process, right? That's what I like. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets, including finals tickets, with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We're back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day for your second listen. Obviously, it's Thursday. It's finals day. We made it. What a gap it was. Locked On Mavs, Locked On Celtics. I'm sure they're getting in their last rounds of finals previews. And then finally, back to talking hoops tonight. Can't wait to watch this series. My official pick, I had a great first round of predictions in this playoffs and was pretty bad the rest of the way. I'm taking Celtics in 6 for what it's worth. Let's march on talking about the shooting guard position in free agency. So we've gone through the Pacers' resources on a podcast. We've talked about their outlook, how they can add players, what their internal free agents are, how the extensions play all into this. Now, how does this look from a free agency perspective for a position that actually has some players who are good or would make sense on any team, including the Pacers? What would they pursue? The first question is, if there is someone worth using the mid-level exception on, which the Pacers have, are they more valuable to the Pacers than Obi Toppin would be? Because likely anyone signed with the non-taxpayer mid-level exception would get the Pacers close enough to the tax that they would have a lot of trouble keeping Obi Toppin reasonably without trading someone else away. Maybe they're okay with paying a big tax this year. If they're not, which I don't think they are, that's just a guess given their current competing level, but maybe they are, then maybe that would not happen. So I bring that up to say, if it, like Buddy Hield, I hate to keep bringing him up because he just played for the team, and it's going to sound like I'm using that as a good example, but he just happens to be the fourth guy on the list of highest paid shooting guards last year in the league. He's probably a mid-level exception player. He'll probably who knows how that will go for him, given what happened with the Pacers last year. I don't mean specific with the Pacers, I mean in general. But, is he more valuable to the Pacers than Obi Toppin? I would probably say no, given the current state of the Pacers at 2 guard. But in general, that's the kind of thing. Whereas, for example, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, if he was available for the mid-level exception, which then I'd have a lot of questions about the Denver Nuggets, but that would be a player, even though he's considered a 2 guard, that would be more valuable to the Pacers than Obi Toppin. KCP, to me, is among the best kind of players that would fit next to Tyrese Haliburton at that spot with his abilities on both ends of the floor. So that's kind of how I would think about this. That said, I only bring that up because those are the three, that resource is how the Pacers would pursue, in theory, some of the best guys on the market. But I brought it up because there's 3 guys who are going to be free agents this summer that are going to get more than the mid-level, certainly, which makes them substantially harder for the Pacers to acquire, if not impossible. 2 of them are pretty much impossible, and that's James Harden and Klay Thompson. I assume both of them will get more than the mid-level. Klay, you never know coming off the injury, but I'd imagine he gets 15 to 20 million, maybe a little more than that per year. James Harden, who knows? I'm assuming he'll stay with the Clippers. Either way, they're both totally unrestricted free agents with no options. Pacers can't afford them, have little use for them. I guess in Klay's case, he could play on the wing, but he'll be too expensive. They're out. But the best player on the market at this spot, as listed by Spotrac, we already went through this exercise right after the All-Star break. We'll do it again in more brief terms this time, is Paul George. And the reason I'm bringing this up is there was previous reporting before the Siakam trade, which is key, and Jake Fisher in his Yahoo Sports piece recently pointed out that there were connections between this before that trade, Paul George and the Pacers. And they've obviously played together before, and a lot of fans obviously wouldn't want it, but he's very good. The reason I bring this up is because the only reason it's possible to me within the realm of 0 to 2%, not high, extremely low, that the Pacers could feasibly acquire Paul George this summer is not because I think he'd take a discount to come here. They can't afford, if he just goes on the free agency market, they can't afford him, even if they lose Siakam. They just can't. But he has a player option, which opens up the cracking door to this plausible situation. So to explain it, I'm going to go back to last year and talk about Kristaps Porzingis, who was with the Wizards. If you remember this, Porzingis had a player option with the Wizards last year, and the trade talks kind of started. And so what has to happen is Porzingis has to have an offer from some other non-Wizards team that he can say, hey, I'm going to opt out and take that, because that threat leaves them with, well, or I'll opt in and you can get assets by trading me to this specific team that I want to go to. And I don't know if that's how Porzingis demanded things specifically, but he ends up on the Boston Celtics and opts in, and the Wizards get stuff, right? They get assets back in that trade instead of losing Porzingis for nothing if he opted out and went to another team. And so Porzingis had a player option, and he used it to not return to the Wizards, but he used the opt-in to get to his destination. And so that is what free agency is. The difference is having the player option allows you to use free agency, not just to opt out and sign somewhere else, but to opt in and be traded somewhere you specifically want, because you have the threat of not opting in and making a trade elsewhere totally impossible, right? So there is a deadline that would make things tricky, but Paul George has a player option. So if he hypothetically, again, this is totally hypothetical, said, hey, I'm going to the Sixers in free agency, but the other thing I would do is I would go to the Pacers. I'll opt in if you trade me there. And if you're the Clippers, it's either lose Paul George for nothing to the Sixers or trade him to the Pacers for whatever you can get. You obviously would go with be there unless you're getting literally negative value. So that is why the door is open, the smallest crack. Do I think this is going to happen? No. Would I put it at a % chance higher than 1? No. But is it legal and plausible? I suppose. That trade would require a lot of stuff, likely Myles Turner and Aaron Nesmith and young guys, just from a salary matching perspective, right? Paul George set to make $44 million next year. But like Myles Turner's a certainty in that kind of trade. But it's not impossible, which is why we bring it up, because previous reporting mentioned it. And Paul George talked about Indiana at All-Star Weekend because it was in Indy. A lot of people asked him about it or at that presser, including myself. And it merited a whole segment from me. I talked all about all the machinations and why, yes, it's possible, but why it's exceedingly unlikely. Because the other part is, it's hard for the Pacers to send out a lot of money, like $44 million or more. And so they would be adding salary in this trade. And then once again, they run into their tax concerns and they'd have to add more players because they're trading 3 for 1 or 4 for 1 or something like that. It's all very hard to put together, but not impossible. So the very best player at this position is Paul George. And is it possible the Pacers could get him in free agency? Yes, but not by signing Paul George, by trading for Paul George. The other best players at this position already went through Harden, already went through Clay. Exceedingly unlikely. Don't have player options. Hield's the fourth guy. I'm just going through salaries from last year. Fifth is actually Bruce Brown. I actually kind of think the Raptors will just pick up that option and use him similar to the Pacers, kind of as this trade ballast of salary. He's a good player. He's not a $22.5 million player, but he's a good player. And then this position kind of turns into not as much, right? Those 5 guys clearly have utility on teams. KCP clearly has utility to me on like a high level, high minutes role on good teams. But the rest of this crew of, the above $10 million guys from last year, Alec Burks, who was awesome against the Pacers, so maybe he does. Talen Horton-Tucker, Gary Harris, Luke Kennard, Malik Beasley, Gary Trent, Evan Fournier. Do any of them have high, huge minute roles on really good teams? We'll actually talk more about Gary Harris in the final segment here, but that's a lot of shooters who can't defend, specialists or ball handler types in Talen Horton-Tucker's case that don't really fit the Pacers and aren't as conducive to winning at this stage of their career. In some of their cases, they were previously, so not as appealing. And then when you get below the 10 million threshold, there's Malik Monk, who's fantastic. He's probably the 4th best actual shooting guard, air quotes, on the market this summer, but is above the Pacers price range, right? So that's just out of the question for them. The next player is DeAnthony Melton, who I personally love. You've heard me this show for a while. You've heard me wax poetic about him before. If he could be had, I think the Pacers should think about it. He's only 26. He's got some size. He can defend. He can handle the ball. He can kind of shoot. We'll talk about him in the next segment too. But maybe out of their price range. And then Isaac Okoro, restricted, not leaving Cleveland. Then it's basically all minimum guys. Eric Gordon, Justin Hunt. So it's kind of a weird market of guys the Pacers wouldn't necessarily want, guys who wouldn't have big roles on the Pacers, even if they didn't have a really full spot here. And so the best of the best is obviously very good. Paul George is incredible. James Harden's a good player, right? I love me some Malik Monk. Buddy Hield and Bruce Brown proved to the Pacers last year they have utility, but what does that mean for the Pacers? What are their realistic targets? To me, the best shooting guards for the Pacers would be guys who can easily play the 3 or even the 4, guys who can defend. That should be their number 1 priority as they search for players, but also can shoot is a pretty important skill to have at the 2, or guys who could reasonably fill in as a vet type and then slide in if a move is made later. Are there any of those out there who actually make sense for the Pacers in this spot, if anybody? We will talk about that to close out today's show. Before we get to that stuff, though, we've got to talk about PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. With PrizePicks, you can turn $10 into $1,000 in a single game. Watching your favorite sports this summer, you can make a PrizePicks lineup in as little as 60 seconds. You just need to pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you're locked in. If you're looking for promotions, they've got you covered every week, from lowering select player stat projections on Tuesdays to increase your chances of a win, or getting your entry fee back if you lose a lineup on a Friday. PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Get in on the daily action with your friends, become part of the PrizePicks community, and the finals are here in both the NHL and the NBA, which means more on PrizePicks, and so do the star players. You get boosted payouts on select stars that you won't find anywhere else. And when the finals are over, the hoop action doesn't stop. Women's basketball rolling, Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, Asia Wilson, all of them. You can up to 100 times your cash on all that stuff. For example, on PrizePicks in the finals, Jaylen Brown, more than or less than 25 points. Jason Tatum, more than or less than 10 rebounds. Or on the W side, Caitlin Clark, more than or less than 3.5 3-pointers made. Brianna Stewart, more than or less than 23 points. That's how you play. Download the PrizePicks app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the PrizePicks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. PrizePicks, it's that easy. We are back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, Locked On Women's Basketball. There's been a lot of fever chatter there this week, not for basketball reasons, but still. Locked On NBA for the latest on the finals and coaching searches. Locked On Lakers because JJ Redick might be a coach. I've enjoyed the jokes about podcasters becoming coaches. He obviously played the NBA and is a really good broadcaster. I think he'll actually do an okay job there, but I'm always hesitant on the no experience to head coach pipeline. Locked On Lakers will tell you more about it. I could never be a head coach in the NBA. Let's talk about shooting guards that, to me, make sense for the Pacers. And I will start with a guy that fits the first segment discussion I talked about, of a guy who would maybe be comfortable not playing, but could eventually slide in if trades are made or something like that. And that's Evan Fournier, because he's kind of big. He's like 6'7". He can defend a little bit. In the past, he shot it well. 37% for his career. Don't look at the last 2 years. You'll be very dismayed by his shooting then. But he's only played 59 games the last 2 years because the Knicks just totally exiled him from their rotation. If he would be willing to take a minimum deal to be a third string wing that doesn't play that much, it's a good signing to me, right? Wing sized, who can play the 3 clearly. Honestly, he probably played the 3 majority of his minutes with New York, even dating back to Orlando. So that would be an interesting one for me. In fact, looking at the play-by-play data of his minutes, just going on height, 88% of his minutes with the Knicks this season were logged as a small forward. And the last time he was more 2 than 3 was 3 years ago. And the last time before that was maybe never. The last time before that was 2018-19 with the Orlando Magic. So that's where Fournier can kind of be a force here. He's more of a 3. But you have to, if you're him, know that there's no minutes really available. Like, he's not better than anyone who the Pacers would presently have on the wing in that spot, but he can kind of shoot. He can kind of defend. That's the kind of thing you'd squint and be happy about if you're the Pacers. And a guy who's better at him at maybe both of those things at this stage, and is from Indy. So the sales pitch is much easier, and is a Tony East favorite, both because he's from Indy and because he's a good player, is Gary Harris. Is Gary Harris a guy who's at the stage of his career where he's at a not playing level yet? No. Right, he is an in a rotation for a team level player. He played over half of the games for the Magic last year, and injuries held down his playing time. But in Orlando, the last 4 years has been always a very reliable bench guy. He's still at that level. He is not willing to take the role I just described. The reason I like Gary Harris, same things as Evan Fournier. He can shoot it. 43% 2 years ago, 37% last year. Last time he was under league average was before the bubble. Good shooter. Good defender. He's a little shorter. He's 6'4", but he's wing-sized-ish. And even on the Magic, snuck in some minutes where it was clear, according to the play-by-play height data, that he was playing the 3. And being from Indy, specifically Fishers, he could be enticed by that, but he likely wouldn't have an actual role playing in games. So, the thing you have to think about is, are they better than Mathurin or Nembhard? And if not, or Nesmith really, and if not, or even if it's close, are they worth burying Ben Shepherd over? No, in this case. So he'd be a guy that is outside of their rotation. And I don't think Gary Harris is at that point of his career. So dreamy fit if he's at that stage, but I doubt he is. For the Pacers, I love the Anthony Melton. I already brought him up. I think he'll get too much money for the Pacers to afford him this summer. So we'll cruise over him. But if a trade is made, just know that, and the Pacers free up some money or free up a chance to get the Anthony Melton, just know I will be talking about it quite a bit. He is on the ball handler side, not the 3 or D side, I guess, to be more specific. Luke Kennard is a great shooter that I've always had an affinity for, but he is not a good defender at all. If he would be willing to take a minimum for that kind of role, maybe, but he probably thinks, and he's probably right, that he should be playing somewhere on a team. Same kind of deal with Malik Beasley. Pacers just saw what his defense looked like in the postseason, right? This is a really hard position to extract value out of. That's why the Fournier thing is interesting to me, because at age 32, what's his career look like now? And if he can defend a little bit, is he really a minimum player? Or should he really be out of a rotation somewhere? Similar thought to Justin Holiday, who just had a great playoffs, by the way. Justin Holiday was awesome for the Nuggets in the playoffs, but he got the minimum from Denver last year. Would he be willing to come back to Indiana for an unpromised role? Probably not. He just had a good postseason. Wesley Matthews, coming up on age 38, would he be willing to come back to Indiana for a veteran not playing that much kind of minimum role as a deep two guard who can kind of play the 3 and shoot a little bit? Probably not. A guy I've always liked who fits a lot of the bills that we've talked about. What is that? Fits a lot of the bills. Checks a lot of the boxes that we've talked about today is Josh Richardson. I've always been a Josh Richardson fan. Wing sized, right? Probably Nesmith sized, maybe a little taller, but a lot thinner, certainly. He's 30. He's had good shooting seasons and some bad ones, but 36% for his career is pretty good. Has gone through the Miami School of training twice. Like, I've always liked Josh Richardson as a player. He can play 2, 3, and handle the ball enough to be a 1. He's probably too expensive for the Pacers and is probably at a point of, actually certainly at a point of, in a team's rotation. So he's probably out. Garrett Temple, just talked about him in the first segment, might fit the vet willing to step in at a later time. And now we're at the tough part of looking at this where everybody kind of left. Lonnie Walker's had some good moments in the past. He's young-ish, but probably wouldn't play. Svi Mikhailiuk can shoot it. He's still alive for the Celtics. Damian Lee had good moments for the Suns last year. He's about to turn 32. Would he be on the no longer playing role? Two good players I haven't really mentioned yet because they have team options are Isaiah Joe and Aaron Wiggins. There's no way they're not with OKC again next year, right? You're already running really low on the guys that make sense to play or guys that have enough, acumen and veteran leadership to say, oh yeah, you could see this, or guys who are specialists in any way. So there's not a lot of standout guys to me at this position in this free agency class for the Pacers. So my favorite 3 that are somewhat reasonable would probably be Gary Harris, Josh Richardson, and Evan Fournier, just because there's like a reasonable path to them that would get them on the Pacers. But in 2 of their cases, they'd probably be, too good to actually merit signing with Indiana. I think Evan Fournier kind of hits that sweet spot. Garrett Temple might hit that sweet spot. Wes Matthews, Justin Holiday might hit that sweet spot. And the key thing to those last 4 names I just said is they can kind of play the 3 also, right? They're all tall enough to size up in position. So even if there's injuries elsewhere and you have to slide things around with your team, you have enough height and size and ability to do that. Garrett Temple, 6'5". Justin Holiday, the Pacers have seen for forever, 6'6", 6'7". Kind of range. Wes Matthews is a little shorter. But anyway, that is the gist of what the shooting guard market would look like for the Pacers. The best players, the guys who could be in their price range that makes sense, skills they should be looking for, what they should prioritize. And it'll be fascinating to see what happens at that spot. We're through the guard spots where the Pacers are very flush with talent. We hit the forwards next where the Pacers have some talent, but you can always use more wings. You can always use more good 4s. The Pacers did not have any 4s for the longest time. And we'll talk about those with guests next week, looking at the wing market, looking at the power forward market, and player reviews coming next week as well. And the first one is tomorrow with Caitlin Cooper. We'll be talking small forwards, so expect lots of deep dive discussion about Aaron Nesmith, Doug McDermott, and we're putting Jarris Walker in this category for episode number 1. I'm really looking forward to it. A lot of you guys really enjoyed those last year. Really, really intense deep dives on everybody, running through those. So lots coming. The offseason's rolling. We're already a week into June, which is crazy. The Pacer season was so long. Hope you guys enjoyed this show. I'm on Twitter or X or whatever at Tony R. East, and the show is there at Locked On Pacers. That or commenting on YouTube is the best place for me to see what you're saying, or if you have questions about the cap, stuff like that. One more thing before I forget. Jalen Smith and TJ McConnell's max extensions, I talked about those 2 days ago, yesterday, are actually the same as Andrew Nembhard's. I misspoke when I talked about their maximum values. That said, the numbers I said for them are more likely their range of values, but are not their maximum values. That's the same as Andrew Nembhard's 4 years, somewhere between $75 and $80 million. Max, not expected max. That's key. Hope you guys enjoyed this show. If you have any other questions, please let me know. If not, have a wonderful day. Talking player season recaps tomorrow. Till then, have a wonderful day.